The bitter November wind whistled through the cracks in Grace Grayson's makeshift shelter, a pitiful lean-to constructed from scavenged planks and discarded canvas against the back wall of Placerville's general store. At 32, Grace had never imagined she would end up like this, widowed, homeless, and facing the harsh California winter of 1871, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her husband's pocket watch clutched in her trembling hands. The sun was setting earlier each day, casting long shadows across the muddy streets of Placerville. The gold rush boomtown wasn't what it had been 20 years prior, but it still bustled with enough activity that most folks were too busy to notice the quiet widow who'd taken to sleeping behind Harrington's general store. Grace pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as another gust of wind threatened to dismantle her shelter. 3 months ago, she'd had a home, a husband, and a future. Now Thomas was dead shot during a stagecoach robbery while traveling to Sacramento on business, and the bank had foreclosed on their modest home when Grace couldn't make the payments. With no family and few marketable skills beyond keeping a household, she'd quickly exhausted the sympathy of acquaintances. "Madam, you can't stay here." The voice startled Grace from her thoughts. She looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the dimming sky. "I'll move along," she replied automatically, gathering her small bundle of possessions. She'd become accustomed to being shooed away. "Wait." The man stepped closer, and in the fading light, Grace could make out his features. He wore a cowboy hat pulled low, with dark hair visible beneath it, a weathered duster, and boots caked with trail dust. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Grace squared her shoulders, her pride still intact despite everything. "I'm quite fine, thank you." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing eyes as blue as a summer sky. "Forgive me, but you don't look fine. You look like you're freezing, and this shelter won't hold up when the real cold hits." "I'm aware," she said tersely, then immediately regretted her tone. This stranger was showing more concern than anyone had in weeks. "I apologize, it's been difficult lately." "I'm Isaiah Lancaster," he said, extending a hand. "I work at the Silver Creek Ranch just outside town." Grace hesitated before accepting his handshake. "Grace Grayson." "Widow Grayson, I suppose," Isaiah nodded solemnly. "Mrs. Grayson, there's a storm coming tonight. You can't stay here." "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted, the words burning her throat with shame. Isaiah glanced around, clearly conflicted. "There's a small cabin on the ranch property. It's not much, but it's empty and has a solid roof and a stove. You could stay there, at least until the storm passes." Grace's instinct was to refuse. She'd been raised to be self-sufficient, not to accept charity from strangers. But the wind was picking up, carrying the unmistakable scent of snow, and her fingers were already numb with cold. "Why would you help me?" she asked, wariness edging her voice. "Because no one should be out in weather like this," he replied simply. "And because I know what it's like to have nothing." Something in his tone convinced her he spoke from experience. Grace looked at her pathetic shelter, then back at Isaiah's earnest face. "Just until the storm passes," she agreed finally. Isaiah nodded. "My horse is hitched outside the saloon." "Can you ride?" "Yes," Grace said, gathering her meager belongings, a change of clothes, Thomas's watch, their marriage certificate, and a daguerreotype of their wedding day. Everything that remained of her former life fit into a single cloth bag. The walk to the saloon was silent, Grace too consumed with mixed emotions to engage in conversation. She felt both profound relief and deep humiliation. When they reached Isaiah's horse, a handsome chestnut gelding, he helped her mount before swinging up behind her. "Hold tight," he instructed as they set off toward the outskirts of town. The ride took nearly an hour, the trail winding through pine forests and rocky passes. By the time they reached Silver Creek Ranch, darkness had fallen completely, and the first few snowflakes were beginning to drift from the sky. The ranch was larger than Grace had expected, with a main house, bunkhouse, barn, and several outbuildings visible in the moonlight. Isaiah guided his horse past the main structures toward a small cabin set apart from the others, nestled against a stand of ponderosa pines. "Here we are," he said, dismounting and helping Grace down. "Like I said, it's not much, but it's dry and warm once you get a fire going." The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a cast iron stove, a narrow bed, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs and a few shelves. But to Grace, after weeks of sleeping outdoors, it looked like a palace. "The owner keeps it for occasional guests," Isaiah explained as he lit a lantern. "No one's using it now, and Mr. Holbrook is away until spring, so he won't mind." "Won't the other ranch hands question my presence?" Grace asked, concerned. Isaiah shook his head. "They might wonder, but they won't cause trouble. I'm the foreman here when Holbrook's away." He moved to the stove and began building a fire. "There's firewood stacked outside, enough to last a while. I'll bring more tomorrow." "Thank you," Grace said, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. "I don't know how I'll repay you." "No need," Isaiah replied, straightening as the fire caught. "There's a pump out back for water. It might be frozen in the morning, so I filled this bucket earlier. I'll bring some food from the main house." When Isaiah returned with a basket containing bread, cheese, dried beef, and apples, Grace had removed her shawl and was warming her hands by the stove. "It's not much," he said, setting the basket on the table. "It's more than enough," Grace assured him, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. "I can't remember the last time I had a proper meal." Isaiah frowned at this but didn't press for details. "I should let you rest. I'll check on you tomorrow." After he left, Grace sat at the table and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The simple food tasted better than any fancy dinner she could remember. When she finished, she explored the cabin more thoroughly. There was a small shelf with a few books, a basin for washing, and a chest containing blankets and linens. She made up the bed, changed into her cleanest clothes, and for the first time in months, fell asleep feeling safe. The storm Isaiah had predicted arrived during the night, and Grace awoke to a world transformed by snow. Through the cabin's single window, she could see drifts piling against the trunks of the pines, and more snow was falling steadily. The cabin remained snug, however, the stove radiating welcome heat. A knock at the door startled her. She hastily smoothed her hair and straightened her dress before opening it to find Isaiah, his shoulders dusted with snow, holding another basket. "Good morning," he said. "I brought breakfast and thought you might need more firewood." "Thank you," Grace said, stepping aside to let him in. "The storm is worse than I expected." "It's the earliest heavy snow we've had in years," Isaiah confirmed, stamping his boots before entering. "Might be a sign of a hard winter ahead." As he set the basket down, Grace noticed he was favoring his right leg. "Are you injured?" Isaiah glanced down with a rueful smile. "Old wound, axe up in cold weather. From the war?" Grace asked, then immediately worried she'd overstepped. "Yes," Isaiah's expression closed briefly before he continued. "I served with the Union cavalry, took a Confederate bullet at Gettysburg." "I was lucky many weren't." Grace nodded, understanding. Thomas had been too old for the war, but many of their neighbors' sons had never returned. "My father served as well. He came back, but changed." "Most of us did," Isaiah said quietly. He straightened and gestured to the basket. "Eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Cookie makes enough to feed an army." "It smells wonderful," Grace said. Would you join me? There's plenty." Isaiah hesitated, then nodded. "Let me bring in that wood first." They ate together at the small table, the silence gradually giving way to conversation. Grace learned that Isaiah had been working at Silver Creek Ranch for 3 years. Before that, he'd drifted through much of the West after the war, unable to settle, haunted by what he'd seen and done. "What brought you to Placerville?" he asked eventually. Grace sighed, pushing the remaining food around her plate. "My husband, Thomas, he had dreams of starting a business here. We moved from St. Louis 2 years ago, used most of our savings to buy a small house and set up his watch repair shop." "Was business not good?" "It was starting to be," Grace said sadly. "People were just beginning to know his work." Then 3 months ago, he traveled to Sacramento to purchase supplies and was killed when bandits robbed the stage coach. Isaiah's face darkened. I'm sorry. Did they catch who did it? Grace shook her head. No, the sheriff said it was likely the Donner Pass gang. They've been terrorizing the route for months. I've heard of them, Isaiah said grimly. What happened after? After Thomas died, Grace's voice caught. I tried to keep the shop open, but I don't have his skills. The bank held the mortgage on our house and business. Without income, I couldn't make the payments. They foreclosed last month, and no family to turn to. None. My parents passed years ago, and I was an only child. Thomas's family is all back east and never approved of our move west. Grace looked down at her hands. I've been trying to find work, but it's not easy for a woman alone, Isaiah finished for her. No, Grace agreed. I tried to get work at the hotel as a maid, at the laundry, even at the saloon, just serving drinks, mind you. But Placerville isn't booming like it once was. No one's hiring. Isaiah studied her thoughtfully. Well, you're welcome to stay here until you figure things out. The storm might last several days anyway. I can't impose indefinitely, Grace protested. It's no imposition, Isaiah insisted. This cabin would just sit empty otherwise, and perhaps, he paused, considering something, perhaps there might be work for you here at the ranch. What kind of work? Holbrook's wife died 2 years ago. Since then, the main house has fallen into disrepair. None of us cowboys are much for housekeeping. If you wouldn't mind cleaning, maybe cooking sometimes when Cookie needs help. Hope fluttered in Grace's chest for the first time in months. I would be very grateful for the opportunity. Isaiah smiled, and Grace noticed how it transformed his face, softening the hard lines etched by whatever hardships he'd endured. Good, I'll speak to the other hands. For now, rest, stay warm. I'll bring more supplies later. True to his word, Isaiah returned that afternoon with more food, additional blankets, and a stack of books. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, Grace felt a tentative peace settling over her. The next several days followed a similar pattern. The snow continued to fall intermittently, blanketing the ranch in white. Each day, Isaiah would visit, bringing provisions and staying a little longer each time. They talked about their pasts, Isaiah's childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the war, his wandering years after. Grace told him about growing up in Ohio, meeting Thomas at a church social, their dreams of adventure that had brought them west. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, revealing a crystalline blue sky and a transformed landscape. Isaiah arrived with his usual basket, but also brought a surprise, a warm coat, much sturdier than Grace's threadbare shawl. It belonged to Mrs. Holbrook, he explained when Grace protested the generosity. It's just gathering dust in the main house. She'd want it to be used. Wrapped in the coat, Grace ventured outside for the first time since arriving at the cabin. The cold air stung her cheeks, but the sunshine felt glorious after days confined indoors. Would you like to see the ranch? Isaiah offered. They walked slowly through the snow, Isaiah pointing out the various buildings and explaining the operation. Silver Creek Ranch raised cattle primarily, but also kept horses, some of which they trained and sold. It's beautiful, Grace said as they stood on a small rise overlooking the property, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. I thought so too the first time I saw it, Isaiah agreed. After years of drifting, it felt right. As they walked back toward the cabin, Isaiah broached the subject of work again. I spoke with the hands about you helping out. They're all for it, especially when I mentioned you might cook occasionally. Grace laughed, the sound surprising her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. I'm a decent cook, though not as experienced as a ranch cook, I imagine. Cookie makes hearty food, but variety isn't his strong suit, Isaiah said with a wink. The men would welcome something different now and then. They worked out an arrangement. Grace would clean the main house 3 times a week and help with cooking twice a week. In exchange, she could continue staying in the cabin and would receive a small wage. It's not much, Isaiah said apologetically. It's everything, Grace replied, her eyes filling with tears. You've given me a chance when no one else would. The next weeks established a new rhythm to Grace's life. She threw herself into caring for the main house, which had indeed been neglected. Gradually, she transformed it from a bachelor's domain back into a home, cleaning away layers of dust, polishing woodwork, and arranging the few feminine touches that remained from Mrs. Holbrook's time. The ranch hand's 5 men besides Isaiah were initially awkward around her, but soon warmed to her presence, especially after her first cooking night produced a chicken pie that had them scraping their plates for the last morsel. They were a diverse group. Elderly Hank, who handled the horses, Mexican brothers Miguel and Javier, who knew cattle better than anyone, young Billy, who was learning every aspect of ranch work, and taciturn Frank, who managed the accounts and supplies. But it was Isaiah that Grace found herself looking forward to seeing each day. He often found reasons to check on her, bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a jar of honey, wildflowers that somehow survived the snow. They began taking walks together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. December arrived, bringing Christmas preparations. Grace decorated the main house with pine boughs and red berries and planned a special dinner for the ranch hands. She used her first wages to purchase small gifts for each man: tobacco for Hank, a new kerchief for Frank, candy for Billy, playing cards for the brothers, and for Isaiah, a journal bound in soft leather. Christmas Eve dinner was a festive affair, with all the hands dressed in their Sunday best. Grace had spent the day cooking with Cookie, preparing roast beef, potatoes, various vegetables, and pies for dessert. The men ate heartily, telling stories and laughing, making the main house feel more alive than it had in years. After dinner, they exchanged gifts. Grace was surprised when each man presented her with something as well. Hank had carved a small wooden box. The brothers gave her a colorful woven shawl. Billy offered a posy of dried flowers he'd preserved from fall, and Frank had found a pretty china teacup in town. Isaiah's gift came later, after the others had returned to the bunkhouse. He asked Grace to walk with him, despite the cold night. Under a sky brilliant with stars, he gave her a small package. "It isn't much," he said, echoing his words from their first meeting. Grace unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a silver locket. "Isaiah, it's beautiful," she breathed, opening it to find it empty. "I thought you might want to put the photograph of your husband in it," Isaiah said quietly, "to keep him close to your heart." Tears welled in Grace's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she whispered. Isaiah helped her fasten it around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin. For a moment, Grace thought he might say something more, but instead, he offered his arm for the walk back to her cabin. Winter deepened, bringing more snow and bitter cold. January found the ranch often isolated by impassable roads, but Grace found she didn't mind. She had shelter, work, and companionship more than she dared hope for just 2 months earlier. Her relationship with Isaiah evolved gradually. Their evening walks continued when weather permitted. Sometimes they'd simply sit in the main house by the fire, reading or talking. Isaiah revealed more of his war experiences, the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him, the guilt he carried for surviving when friends hadn't. Grace shared her own fears and regrets that she hadn't appreciated Thomas enough while he was alive, that she'd failed to learn skills that might have saved her from destitution after his death, her shame at having ended up homeless. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Isaiah told her firmly. "Life can break any of us, given the right circumstances. What matters is finding the strength to rebuild." February brought a brief thaw, and with it, visitors to the ranch, the banker from Placerville and his wife, come to discuss business with Isaiah in Holbrook's absence. Grace served them tea in the newly restored parlor, taking pride in the impressed looks they exchanged at the house's condition. Later, Mrs. Dawson cornered Grace in the kitchen. "My dear, I nearly didn't recognize you. When I last saw you in town, you were." She trailed off, apparently recalling it was impolite to mention Grace's former circumstances. Yes, I was in quite a different situation, Grace acknowledged calmly. Mr. Lancaster gave me an opportunity for which I'm very grateful. Mrs. Dawson's eyebrows rose. Indeed. And is gratitude all you feel for him? Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Lancaster is my employer. Of course, Mrs. Dawson said with a knowing smile. Well, I'm pleased to see you've landed on your feet. Perhaps when you return to town, you might call on me. I'm often in need of help with social functions. The exchange left Grace unsettled. Return to town. She realized she hadn't thought beyond the immediate future. What would happen when Mr. Holbrook returned in spring? Would she be expected to leave? More troubling was Mrs. Dawson's implication about her feelings for Isaiah. Grace had been so focused on survival, on rebuilding her life, that she hadn't allowed herself to examine the warmth that filled her whenever Isaiah was near. The way her heart quickened at his smile, how she found herself watching for him from the window. It felt like betrayal of Thomas, of Isaiah's kindness, of herself. Thomas had been dead barely 6 months, and Isaiah had never indicated he saw her as anything but someone in need of help. That evening, Isaiah found her on the porch of her cabin, staring at the sunset painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, joining her. Yes, Grace agreed, trying to maintain her composure. Mrs. Dawson mentioned something today that has me concerned. Oh, Isaiah leaned against the porch railing. What's that? When spring comes and Mr. Holbrook returns, will I need to leave? Isaiah looked surprised. Is that what you want? No, Grace admitted. I've come to care for this place, but I don't want to presume. Grace, Isaiah said gently, Holbrook will be pleased to find his house in order again. He's mentioned more than once that the place needs a woman's touch. Your position is secure for as long as you wish to stay. Relief flooded through Grace, followed quickly by confusion about her other concern. Mrs. Dawson also seemed to think that perhaps my feelings for you might extend beyond gratitude. Isaiah stilled, his expression unreadable in the fading light. And do they? Grace's heart hammered in her chest. I don't know, she whispered honestly. Thomas has been gone such a short time, I feel disloyal even considering the question. Isaiah nodded slowly. I understand, I would never rush you, Grace. But I want you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond simple concern or friendship. He reached out, gently taking her hand. When I first saw you behind that store, something told me you were special. These past months have only confirmed it. You're strong, Grace. Stronger than you know. You've rebuilt your life from nothing. You've brought warmth back to this ranch that's been missing since Mrs. Holbrook passed. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. I'm afraid, she confessed. Afraid of losing everything again. I know, Isaiah said softly. Fear is the price we pay for caring. But living without caring, that's not really living at all, is it? They stood in silence as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. Isaiah didn't press for a response, simply held her hand until the cold drove them inside. March arrived with warming temperatures and the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of ground that had been hidden for months. Birds returned, filling the mornings with song. The roads cleared enough for regular trips to town, and Grace accompanied Isaiah on one such journey. Placerville looked different through her eyes, now less a place of desperation, and more simply a town with both good and bad memories. At Isaiah's suggestion, they visited Thomas's grave in the small cemetery on the edge of town. Grace laid wildflowers on the simple marker and said a silent goodbye. Thank you, she told Isaiah afterward. I needed to do that. In town, they encountered several people Grace had known during her married life. Some looked away awkwardly, perhaps remembering how they'd turned their backs on her need. Others greeted her warmly, expressing pleasure at her improved circumstances. Mrs. Dawson, true to her word, invited Grace to help with an upcoming social at the bank. We'll pay you, of course, she added, and perhaps it might lead to other opportunities, should you ever wish to return to town life. Grace thanked her but found herself relieved when she and Isaiah headed back to the ranch. Somehow, in the midst of the hardest winter of her life, Silver Creek had become home. As they rode side by side, Grace studied Isaiah's profile against the blue sky. In the months she'd known him, she'd come to recognize the man beneath the cowboy exterior, thoughtful, honorable, wounded by war but not broken by it, capable of great kindness without expectation of return. "Isaiah," she said suddenly, "I think I've found my answer." He turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "About my feelings," Grace clarified. "They do extend beyond gratitude, far beyond." A slow smile spread across Isaiah's face, warming his blue eyes. "I'm mighty glad to hear that, Grace Grayson." That evening they sat by the fire in Grace's cabin, talking of the future. Isaiah spoke of his plans for the ranch, his hope that Holbrook might sell him a stake in the property someday. "I've saved most of my wages these past years," he explained. "Not much to spend money on out here. I'd like to build something lasting, something that might be passed down to children someday." The mention of children made Grace's heart skip. "Is that something you want, a family?" "It is," Isaiah said quietly. "Though I'd given up hope of finding the right woman to share that dream with. Until recently." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know it's soon, I know you're still healing, but I want you to know that when you're ready, if you ever are, I'd be honored to build a life with you, Grace." Grace felt tears well in her eyes, but they were different from the tears of despair she'd shed months ago. These were tears of hope, of possibility. "Thomas would want me to be happy," she said softly. "He always said life was too short to waste a moment of joy when you find it." "Sounds like he was a wise man," Isaiah said. "He was," Grace agreed. "And I think he would approve of you." Isaiah's kiss, when it came, was gentle and undemanding, a promise rather than a claim. Grace felt something unfurl inside her, a tenderness she'd thought frozen forever by grief and hardship. Spring progressed, bringing new growth to the ranch. The cattle were moved to higher pastures, new calves were born, and the days grew longer and warmer. Mr. Holbrook returned as expected and was delighted with the transformation of his house. "Mrs. Grayson, you're a miracle worker," he declared after inspecting the property. "I hope Isaiah is paying you well enough to keep you here." "Actually, sir," Isaiah said, stepping forward to stand beside Grace, "I'm hoping she might have reason to stay beyond her wages." Holbrook looked between them, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "Well now, that is interesting news. I take it congratulations are in order." "Not yet, sir," Grace said quickly, "but perhaps, soon." The old rancher nodded approvingly. "Life moves at its own pace, sometimes slow as molasses, sometimes quick as lightning. The important thing is recognizing the right path when you find it." As spring gave way to summer, Grace's heart continued to heal and open. She and Isaiah spent every free moment together, riding across the ranch, picnicking by Silver Creek, planning and dreaming. The ranch hands watched their courtship with amused approval, occasionally teasing Isaiah, but always treating Grace with respect bordering on reverence, the woman who'd brought their foreman back to life. On a warm evening in early July, Isaiah took Grace to a hilltop overlooking the entire ranch. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, the main house and outbuildings, the pastures where cattle grazed, the distant mountains still capped with snow. "I came here often after the war," Isaiah said, "when the nightmares were bad, something about seeing all this. It reminded me there was still beauty in the world, still good things worth fighting for." He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Grace, when I found you that night, I was just trying to help someone in need. I never imagined you'd help me more than I could ever help you." "That's not true," Grace protested. "You saved my life." "Maybe," Isaiah acknowledged, "but you saved my heart. Before you came, I was existing, not living, going through the motions, doing my job, never letting myself feel too much because feeling hurt too much." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "I love you, Grace Grayson. I want to spend the rest of my life building something with you, this ranch, a family, a future. Will you marry me?" Grace felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Isaiah stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss filled with promise and passion. When they finally separated, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right woman to wear it." They were married in August beneath the pines near Grace's cabin, now their cabin, with the ranch hands, Mr. Holbrook, and a few friends from town in attendance. Grace wore a new dress of pale blue with wildflowers in her hair. Isaiah wore his best suit, his blue eyes never leaving hers throughout the simple ceremony. "You have both known loss and hardship," the minister said, "and through that crucible found each other. May the love you share be stronger for having been forged in difficult times." That night, as stars appeared in the summer sky, Grace and Isaiah sat on the porch of their cabin, hands intertwined. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Grace said softly. "Nor I," Isaiah agreed. "When winter comes this year, we'll face it together." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. From the depths of despair, she had found not just shelter from the storm, but a new beginning, warmth, hope, and love beyond anything she could have imagined that cold November night. The future stretched before them like the vast western landscape, sometimes challenging, always beautiful and full of promise.